This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, back by popular demand, Stephen Coughlin, the author of Catastrophic Failure, and our topic this evening, Naming the Enemy. Stephen Coughlin, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jamie. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Stephen. Look, you're the expert on this. Let's just begin with the latest hook in the news. Donald Trump, in his foreign policy speech just recently, saying, pointing out the failure of Obama and Hillary on many levels, including that they have not said the words radical Islam. Ted Cruz has also mentioned this issue, as well as many others. So let's narrow in on this now. And you're the expert on this. Till now, this administration has failed in that context, correct?
Absolutely. In fact, if there's one thing I'd like to have the Trump people do, and the Cruz people for that matter, but it was the Trump speech today that brought it up, there's one thing I'd like them to do is realize that there's some design behind the not naming the enemy Islamic extremist or Islamic militants or whatever. And that has to do with, of course, the drum I've been beating all year, the CVE, the Countering Violent Extremism narrative. They refuse to do it. Now, if you take a look at the other thing candidate Trump said today, he basically he brought up Benghazi and the fact that despite the fact that it was known at the time that it was a terrorist attack, Hillary Clinton went to bed. But there was more to it than just that, and I want to bring it into naming the enemy. The same person who refuses to name the enemy who they are, they say they're jihadis who fight jihad, according to Islamic law, to further Islamic law. They instead blamed it on, guess what, a YouTube clip. And they basically accused people of engaging in extremism or violent extremism. So you have in the Benghazi event, which was brought up in Trump's speech today, an example where the fact of the matter, the fact that they were declared al-Qaeda jihadis, and the people on the ground and the people in the White House knew that that's what it was at the time, and yet instead, the very next day, September 12th, Hillary Clinton and her staff went and contacted the Organization Islamic Cooperation leadership there, the OIC, the second largest intergovernmental organization, second only to the United Nations, and to domestic Muslim Brotherhood groups to impose this narrative, saying it was this video clip, and to enforce the violent extremism narrative. So there's design here.
Thank you, Stephen. And look, I want to jump around here for a minute to some connected themes. And our audience also, please relax. In terms of what we're saying, maybe Trump said something correct or Cruz said something correct. It's so unfortunate what's happened in the conservative movement now. I mean, I know, people unfriending each other now in the conservative movement. If somebody's for Trump, if somebody's for Cruz. Stephen, perhaps we'll discuss this as well, why there's this splintering. The Glazov Gang is not supporting any particular candidate. We're not telling people who to vote for. We're just talking about ideas, good ideas or bad ideas. So, Stephen, where I'm going with this now is when Trump spoke, when Cruz speaks, it gives us some hope that the Muslim Brotherhood will have less influence over our foreign policy. Because at the moment, the Muslim Brotherhood, as Catastrophic Failure shows, is actually determining and shaping our foreign policy, correct?
Absolutely, and I think in this regard it should be pointed out that Senator Cruz introduced legislation in the Senate that's paired up with House legislation to declare the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. And I think it's important. I would just like to follow up with what you say. I'll help any candidate provide any information they need to know about this issue, and I won't short sheet anybody on this. And I think both these candidates have shown great initiative. Dr. Carson did as well. So I'm here to provide necessary insights and warning about the nature of this threat to the people who will listen, and I'm happy that both of them are.
Okay, now Stephen, let me ask you this. You point out in Catastrophic Failure that the Muslim Brotherhood's penetration of the government and of our culture and society overall is overwhelming. You also point out that Mohammed Ali Biari has boasted that it is now irreversible, that the Muslim Brotherhood infiltration and penetration of the government is irreversible. Now, that was his boast. Perhaps we can be optimistic. Perhaps something can be done. But we know that the infiltration is bad. Do you think if some quote-unquote good people get in, let's say, somebody besides Hillary gets in, let's say, Trump, Cruz, these people that are talking about protecting America from Islamic supremacism, can this penetration be reversed? This would really be a very large overhaul, and it would have a lot of opposition, no?
Actually, I think a good analogy historically is the 1920s in Washington, D.C., where the Ku Klux Klan could have huge open rallies. Those who didn't agree with the Klan were too intimidated to say anything. And I think in an invisible way, the Brotherhood has maintained that type of influence on Capitol Hill. In fact, a Muslim Brotherhood leader was just sentenced a couple years back for the largest influence campaign on Capitol Hill that nobody knew about. Just got out of prison about a year ago. So I think this is a very severe issue. I also think that what's working on our side isn't just that we can have some candidates who are willing to take this issue up, but it does look like the House is going to pass this bill declaring the Brotherhood a terrorist organization. We don't know about the Senate, but I think what's happening is the public is starting to wake up to this issue, and they're starting to demand answers. And like I like to say, we own the facts on this issue. And the fact is that the Muslim Brotherhood that we're talking about, the Muslim Brotherhood of America, had their documents seized by the FBI, that the FBI translated, and our justice admitted into a court of law that unambiguously states that they are here to subvert us. And we had Elie Bieri on his, it's not just that Elie Bieri said that, it's that he said it on his Twitter to anybody who want to listen to it. And he's basically made it clear that he had the Republican Party locked up on this. And I'd like to think he was exaggerating, but then we saw that the Homeland Security, the Committee on Homeland Security, run by Congressman McCall, actually passed CVE legislation through. So this is a great concern, but I think that there's indicators the tide is turning.
Right. And so let me ask this. If we get, and I'm just going to say it here, if we get somebody in that loves this country, that wants to defend this country, because I don't believe that this administration does love this country and does want to protect this country, and there's overwhelming evidence that it does not. And Hillary's cooperation, with this administration, and also what we can talk about with the OIC and what they're planning to do, it's just scary stuff. Stephen, let me ask you this. This administration did not pursue the Muslim Brotherhood front groups as they should have after that trial with the Holy Land Foundation trial. It's very important now, if the House passes this legislation calling the MB a terrorist organization, could this be the foundation for more action where we would go after CARE, MSA, ISNA, all these groups which we know are front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood?
Yes, I definitely think that's a possibility. And the other thing is we will then start to find that there are actually Arab countries that have already declared the Muslim Brotherhood terrorist organization, that then we would have a basis to coordinate with them on certain ventures, and we'd also be able to bring actions against and sanctions against those countries that are supporting them. And I think what that would cause is for us to reassess who our friends are and who aren't our friends in the Muslim world, because we do have friends in the Muslim world who see what the Brotherhood is, see how they facilitate terrorism, and see that they're a problem, and it's a common problem. We have been tricked into thinking that the Muslim Brotherhood is the moderate alternative to radical Al-Qaeda. I think that the facts and what we've seen for the last 20 years and their own written doctrines make it clear that they are the mothership to almost all these radical groups. But it just turns out that most of the radical groups we run into all had people who were knee-deep in the Muslim Brotherhood up until they became radicalized, and then we talk about stopping the radicalization process. Of course, they weren't radicalized. The Brotherhood sees the world the same way Al-Qaeda does. They just take a different orientation to it.
Stephen, so let me ask you this. We know that Hillary is running to be president. Hillary was part of an administration that was presented with the evidence that these Muslim Brotherhood front groups are involved with the Muslim Brotherhood, are involved, in terrorist activity. The Justice Department did not pursue in a legal manner these front groups. The question is why, and Hillary was part of this administration.
Well, I think your answer is quite on point because, in fact, the first Holy Land Foundation case, they had 108 findings of guilt. It was appealed and it was upheld. And part of the appeal was to attack something called the explanatory memorandum, which was the single, very rarely do you find that silver bullet document. And it needs to be clear, they could have won the conviction without it. But in one document, they found exactly what their strategy in America was, and it was subversion. And they won all these convictions, and the idea was to go to a second round of prosecutions, then a third round of prosecutions. And we had a change of administration, and it's my understanding that the Holder Justice Department affirmatively stood those prosecutions down as they were actually ready to litigate. So that did happen. And I'll tell you something more important. A lot of the documents on which the Holy Land Foundation case were based were documents seized by a man from the house by a man named El Barassi, where they found the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, those documents, a large number of those documents were used in the prosecution when left-leaning groups and the ACLU asked to see some of those documents. Justice shared them with them, but the Judiciary Committee asked to see those same seized documents, and they have yet to turn them over. And there is great, great concern in this Holy Land Foundation case that those El Barassi documents that were pressed onto a CD, so they're already in digital format, will at some point be destroyed or lost. They certainly have not been turned over.
Stephen, let's wrap up here. We just have 2 minutes left. So look, let's conclude on this. Let's crystallize in terms of naming the enemy. Look, people like you and me, and so many of the freedom warriors around us, we've been suffering for many years in the sense that, we're trying to name the enemy. We're trying to pinpoint the people who have declared war on us. Islamic supremacism, jihad, stealth jihad, etc. And we have an administration that will not speak its name. And this has been depressing. It's just a terrible situation. And all of a sudden, we have people like Cruz, like Trump, and other voices that are saying we need to start saying this name, and the name of our enemy. And this gives us hope. Conclude for us the hope that this gives us. And if somebody maybe can come and lead America that will name radical Islam as our enemy, because radical Islam has named us as their enemy, and why it's important.
It's the sine qua non. I think that you go all the way back to a book written by a man 500 BC named Sun Tzu and said, you must know the enemy. And our enemy knows that they cannot defeat us on the field of battle. But they can beat us on what we call the information battle space by tricking us into coming up with these esoteric academic models that we then use to replace identifying the enemy. Here's what the whole world knows. I cannot target what I cannot define. Make sense? If I can't define it, I can't target it. If I can't identify you, I can't target you. So by tricking us into thinking that we're so smart that we can overcome the idea of identity and then fight a war to our exhaustion without doing it, I think, first of all, it makes us look like fools. And I think also we're seeing that, like with Hillary Clinton in Benghazi, you could drive a freight train between the gap of who the enemy is and what violent extremism purports to be. And I think what we're seeing with these candidates is exactly what you're saying. Hey, let's get back to the basics. Let's call them who they are. They tell us who they are. Let's call them that. They say what their doctrine is. Let's read it. They're on the battlefield. Let's see if they are the people executing that doctrine like they say. They are, they did, they can. We don't have a problem understanding who they are when we follow Sun Tzu's first principle of war. And I would argue that everything else is malpractice. Everything else.
Well, Stephen, you've also showed, I mean, the reflection of this disaster is that American troops have to warn our enemies what they're doing ahead of time. And this is exactly the opposite of what Sun Tzu teaches in terms of deception, catching the enemy unprepared, etc. And it's caused devastating amount of extra American casualties and deaths. Your book, Catastrophic Failure, demonstrates all this. Look, in under a minute, Stephen, I know that it could take an hour. Let's say the next president of the United States gets into office. He or she calls Stephen Coughlin and says, I want to start fighting Islamic supremacism more effectively, and you got 1 minute to tell the new president something. What would you say?
I would say the first thing you do is do a halt, a halt in the battle, and do an assessment. And that assessment must be fact-driven. We do not need professors to give us 4-syllable words to explain what 1-syllable words and a junior high student can just as well explain. And we need to look at the facts. We need to identify who the enemy is in fact. We need to identify what his doctrines are in fact. We need to understand those doctrines the way he understands them. And we need to understand how the execution matrix they use to engage operates. What we will find is a very clearly defined enemy who clearly defines himself, who is completely comprehensible, and whom, if we follow our classic rules on warfare, our classic rules on intelligence, preparation of the battlefield, IPB is what we used to call it. We can know this enemy, we can engage this enemy, and we can defeat this enemy. It's not hard. You don't need to go to college to figure it out. You just need to know what any football player knows when he goes up against the other defense, and we got to move through.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Just even, my own dream and dreams of so many people is instead of these morons like John Kerry leading American foreign policy, that our next...
And John McCain.
Absolutely, that our next president, when he picks up the phone, would talk to people maybe like Bridget Gabriel or Robert Spencer and Stephen Coughlin.
Ta-da.
Stephen, thank you very much for joining the Glazov gang.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And our audience gets Stephen Coughlin's book. It's a must-read, Catastrophic Failure. And if you like this program and you appreciate what we talk about, please go to jamieglazov.com and support the show, because this is a fan-generated program. And please make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube channel of the Glazov Gang. Tell everybody to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you on the next edition. Good night.
This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.